All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest in our Centre for Brexit Studies series of webinars. We had hoped to be going back to face-to-face encounters by now, but with COVID still being a bit of a nuisance heading into winter, we thought we'd err on the safe side and stick with this format for now. So on that basis, today's theme, of course, is Resilient Brum, looking at the city region going forward as we continue to face the, well, people like to say Brexit's been done, but of course it's not been done, has it? As an unfolding process, we still see issues arising from Brexit. So there is one angle of the challenges facing the region going forward. Of course, having mentioned COVID, businesses, for its example, have still had to deal with continuing issues relating to COVID-19. And of course, as the recent COP26 summit in Glasgow demonstrated all too loud and clear, the challenges of climate change are very real and are confronting us now. And as part of any resilient future going forward, we are certainly going to have to tackle the issues arising from climate change. And that relates, of course, to the notions of greening the economy. It's a fairly sort of loose phrase, may mean many things to many people, but hopefully our speakers today may touch on that in terms of sustainability and renewables and so on. And of course, any transition to a green future will inevitably pose disruptions. There will be businesses that may struggle to shift into the new environment. What's going to happen with them? And of course, let's not forget about the workers that work in these companies. My own current research involves looking at a so-called just transition for the automotive sector, which is a key employing sector in the region. And so there are clearly going to be issues there for companies that have to transition as we move to the widespread use of electric vehicles, phasing out internal combustion engines. Will we have the skill sets to cope with that? Will we be able to attract and retain the business needed to drive those areas forward? And of course, having said all that, Birmingham, the city region, of course, is becoming quite a hub for the services sector, in particular, for example, financial services, as the recent move of HSBC demonstrated, of course, and the continuing narrative, shall we say, around HS2 amply illustrates the connection of Birmingham to London. And so I'm quite happy to welcome 4 distinguished speakers here today. We have Cllr Brigid Jones, the Deputy Leader of Birmingham City Council. We have Beverly Nielsen, our own Beverly Nielsen, who is Associate Professor here at BCU and Executive Director for the Ideas Institute. She's also Senior Fellow here with us at the Centre for Brexit Studies. We have David Horsfall, Property Director of Webster and Horsfall Group and Director of the Tizen Energy Park. And finally, of course, we have Emily Stubbs, who is Policy and Projects Manager at the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce. And before we launch into our speakers, I'll just give you some details for those of you I'm sure are keen to know a bit more in terms of background. In terms of Brigid, Cllr Brigid Jones came to the city at the age of 18 to study at the University of Birmingham, fell in love with it and never left. She was elected the local councillor for Selly Oak Ward in May 2011 and took on the cabinet portfolio for children and family services in 2012. As cabinet member, she helped drive improvements in one of the country's most challenged and scrutinised children's services departments and overhauled the education department. In 2017, she was elected Deputy Leader of Birmingham City Council at the age of 30. Now, we're never supposed to reveal our ages, but to me, that's very impressive. Brigid's been active in politics since 2005 when she joined both the Labour and Cooperative parties, having previously worked in new energy at the University of Birmingham, being a school governor and trustee at other educational organisations and holding a master's degree in physics. Brigid brings her well-rounded experience and values to promote Birmingham as a great urban city in which to learn, live and work. Working at the largest metropolitan authority in England, I think it's the largest in Europe, isn't it? Brigid's agenda in her role is to harness the power of partners across Birmingham to drive the change our city needs, whilst using her extensive experience to help the wider council's improvement agenda. Now, having said that, Brigid, I'm going to hand over the podium to you. In terms of the format, listeners, I would ask you all to keep your notifications on silent. Each of our speakers is going to speak for 10 to 15 minutes, and we will use the chat function on your screen to field any questions. Other basic housekeeping, I'm sure I don't need to remind people of this, but any offensive conduct or abusive language could result in you being kicked off the platform. So let's keep debate and comments nice and civil, please. I'm sure we won't have any need for that. And so therefore, in those terms, I would ask you, post your questions in the chat box. We'll field them at the end unless there's something for clarification. Sian, our great assistant here, is on hand to handle any technical queries of that nature. So without further ado, then Brigid, over to you.
Alex, let me share some slides with you.
Thanks.
So really lovely to see you all this morning, and hopefully you can see the slides up on the screen there.
Yes, they're there.
Fantastic. So Resilient Birmingham. I was going to talk to you a little bit about Birmingham before the pandemic, how things have changed, other issues such as Brexit, no small one, and then on to the future. So just to put Birmingham in context before the pandemic, we were a steadily growing city, although from quite a slow base. We've always been one of the cities with the lowest skill levels or formal skill levels, I should say, in the country. We're a very young city, very young population, but we were a city that was economically growing quite steadily. Overnight, obviously, when the pandemic hit, things changed. You can see that graph at the bottom there with quite the sharp shock of COVID happening, and everything that we had been building on went into question. How did COVID affect it? So unemployment soared in our city. So from an already quite high base, we had unemployment go up by nearly 50%, 44% for youth claimants. It wasn't evenly spread, the impact of COVID across the city, and that's really important. It's often easy to forget how big Birmingham is when you look at it on a map. We have 1.1 million people living within this map that we've got on the screen here. And you can see the darker shaded areas are the ones where unemployment soared the most. The areas that have traditionally been the most deprived for a very, very long time. And it is no surprise that they were hit hardest by COVID. There's also an ethnicity issue hidden in here, which is if you are from a background that is Black, Asian or minority ethnic, you are more likely to have lost your job during COVID, and that's also reflected on here. So it didn't come for people equally in our city when it came. In terms of sectors, so again, different sectors were hit differently. You can see on the side there, the sectors that were hit particularly badly by COVID. Hospitality and culture, retail, construction, of course, took the heaviest hit. But it's interesting to note that most of our buildings for the Commonwealth Games managed to continue on track, which was great. And then there's a number of other sectors that took a medium hit, and a few that were doing okay, particularly life science and healthcare for all the obvious reasons. But some of our biggest industries in the city took a whack from COVID. And those were, again, disproportionately industries that were employing people from poorer backgrounds, people who are Black, Asian or minority ethnic, and younger people as well. We also felt the impact on public services. So education was thrown into crisis along with a number of other services. We've seen soaring need and claimant rates as well at the council. So just from a council point of view, there's two sides to what we do. There's delivering services for the people of Birmingham, and then there's leading the city and trying to drive forward Birmingham and taking that place-based leadership. We've been hit on both fronts in terms of having to run services very differently for COVID, with soaring demand, whilst also trying to help our economy recover. Brexit has to be mentioned. Brexit has been hiding there behind the wall of COVID. A lot of the impacts of Brexit haven't been as felt as they might have been because so many things were closed down, of course, because of COVID, particularly in hospitality and some of those associated sectors. The trade costs and barriers have hit a number of industries around our city. As Alex mentioned, service industries, which have been particularly hit. We are strong on that in Birmingham. It's a growing sector for us, and the lack of recognition of qualifications and equivalent things there has really had an impact. And we are really starting to feel the pressures in terms of particularly labour in the city and people being available for work. Just to put it in context, we've had around about 100,000 people in Birmingham apply for the EOSS scheme. That's the scheme that allows EU citizens to stay in our city. in our country post Brexit, if they've been here already. Significantly more than we were expecting. We're a city of 1.1 million people, so it's nearly 1 in 10 people has put in an application for the EUSS scheme, which is significantly more than we had been expecting. EU structural funding, still massive uncertainty on that. EU structural funding has been geared, of course, towards more deprived places. You've seen from the previous slides, Birmingham is a more deprived place. We have benefited hugely from EU structural funding over the years, still huge uncertainty about how that will be replaced. And it's really important to draw out those Brexit impacts because they have been hidden under the colossal cloud that has been COVID a lot of the time, but they are real and they are being felt in the city, and businesses are reporting problems with it, particularly export and import. What are we doing about all of this? So we've got a strategic approach to recovery at the council. It's worth mentioning, as I said, half what we do is service delivery, half is place leadership. In terms of service delivery, we do around about 1,200 services, discrete services as a council, everything from picking up your bin to looking after parks to adult social care to taking children into care. You name it, we do it. So different services have recovered at different times or gone back to normal at different times. Some have incredible backlogs thanks to COVID still. Some are pretty much back up and running. When it comes to place-based leadership, we have a COVID recovery board which looks at community recovery, but obviously linking into economic recovery because people are the ones who need jobs, and jobs are what create strong communities, amongst many other things. We have been developing our own approach to levelling up being the government's buzzword at the moment. We're not quite sure what the government thinks levelling up means right now. We're still waiting for a clear definition from them, but we've not hung around. We've said we're down in Parliament this week actually pitching to government about what we think it would take to level up Birmingham, and trying to have a conversation with them about that. And there's a number of other working groups around the wider West Midlands as well that we have been working with. Of course, Black Lives Matter is a movement that came to the fore again during COVID. As I've mentioned, people from non-white backgrounds were significantly more hit by COVID than people who are white. On average, and obviously that movement surged for so many reasons, but we wanted to take that seriously as a council. So we published a document called Everyone's Battle, Everyone's Business, Tackling Inequality in Birmingham. I'd urge you to read it if you're interested in this side of things. But it's had extensive community consultation. It's very much looking at how we could tackle some of those entrenched race-based inequalities in our city. They've always been there. COVID threw them into even sharper relief than they have been already. And we've published that. And I'll come on to some of the other things we're doing in just a second. So our economic recovery strategy was adopted back in March of this year, and it's based on our role in place-based leadership, place-based development and management, green recovery, really important. We have declared a carbon emergency at the council. We're aiming to get to net zero by 2030, which is ambitious, but we're working on it. And supporting people and businesses back into work. It's worth mentioning we pumped nearly £1 billion back into the economy through the dishing out of government grants during COVID. The size of the public subsidy for businesses was huge during COVID, and obviously businesses don't have that anymore. They're having to quite often cope with the costs of COVID and Brexit without any economic support, and God knows what the winter will bring this year. But the size of it has been huge. We've given out during the first year of COVID, we gave out more in business grants and business rate relief than we took in the previous year as a city, just to put that in context, the size of the subsidy that went in. That's not there anymore. So we've been supporting businesses to try and stay resilient and helping people to find training and work and unlocking and accelerating infrastructure investment, which I shall come on to. So I mentioned that we have published this week actually, Birmingham's approach to levelling up and what we think it will take to really level up the city. But we've already secured 3 pots of funding from the government's Levelling Up Fund. Those are the Dudley Road, very deprived area next to the City Hospital, looking at major transport improvements there. The Birmingham Wheel site, which is a massive site just to the east of the city centre, which again is in one of the poorest neighbourhoods in the city, and looking at remediating that very contaminated land to create future employment and training opportunities on that site where they're badly needed. And Moseley Road Baths and Balsall Heath Library, which is this gorgeous Grade 2 listed Edwardian swimming pool on Balsall Heath High Street. Very easy to miss if you're not going past it on the bus, staring out the window at it, like I do. There's a common theme throughout our bids. Sadly, we weren't able to get funding for Erdington High Street, but we are trying to secure funding for them there. There's a common theme, and it is going into areas that are most deprived and bidding for money there, but using place-based regeneration. The Moseley Road Baths is an incredible heritage asset. Dudley Road, again, some really great heritage stuff there. Birmingham Wheels is an opportunity to just create a place where there currently is very little on that site. So the theme really is getting out of the city centre. These aren't city centre projects, they are projects in neighbourhoods that have been neglected for a really long time, where we know we can make a difference. That's very much the thrust of our pitches there. Youth unemployment, I've mentioned, it has been incredibly high. It was high before the pandemic, it has surged, and you can see again on that map, the darker areas are where youth unemployment has surged the most in our city, again following roughly your areas of deprivation. You can see the wards there that have the highest increase, so 44% up on before COVID. This is an area we've done a huge amount on. So we've got an employment task force that is working as part of our wider recovery plan. It's got a young people subgroup for all the obvious reasons. I'll come on to the work we've done in just a second, but also an adult subgroup looking, it's often a neglected area, getting adults or older adults later in their careers back into work. On the youth side, we did a huge piece of research called Breaking Down the Barriers. So this was a piece of work, we triangulated it with, we went out there and we asked young people why they couldn't get jobs and what they saw as the barriers. We went out and asked the education services what they saw as the barriers for the people they were supporting getting jobs. And we went out and asked our employers what the barriers were to them employing younger people. And we triangulated the findings, and we got some absolutely fascinating results, because it wasn't always the things that you'd expect. And there were certain things that really came to the fore more. And there were a number of recommendations that came out of that, mental health support being a huge one. Just the confidence knock that young people have taken from the pandemic has been incredible. Better advice online, one-stop hubs, bridging that language gap actually between employers and younger people was really key. Very often employers were talking a completely different language to young people, and young people weren't realizing they had the skills to apply for a job. There are a huge number of recommendations that came out of it that we are working on there in our Breaking Down the Barriers report. And finally, I was going to come on to opportunities that are in the city over and above post-COVID. The Commonwealth Games starts in a terrifying 246 days, not that I'm counting or anything. We bid for the Commonwealth Games 3 years ago. We've been delivering it in half the time you normally get to deliver a Games, and half that time was spent dealing with an international pandemic, so that's been great. But the Games is on track to kick off next summer. Jobs and skills has been, I mean, there's a whole host of reasons why we bid for the Games. 11 days of sport is fun and nice, but really it's about the people of Birmingham, and it's about putting them on the world stage. It's about bringing opportunities to the city that wouldn't otherwise have come. The jobs and skills is a huge one. It is woven through everything they're doing, targeting young people from Birmingham for job opportunities at the Games. We're skilling people up. We've got particular programs to skill up people from more disadvantaged backgrounds to work on the Games. We've got huge volunteering opportunities, again with training attached to those. And there's a schools program as well for young people to learn about the Commonwealth. And let's face it, some of the very tricky issues associated with it and some of the very controversial issues associated with it. We have a whole learning programme for schools to explore that. Physical activity, massive issue for us in Birmingham, one of the least active cities. Huge amount we're trying to do around active travel off the games, active streets, getting young people into sport. We've got augmented reality walking trails, which is a thing, I'm told, which is going to be really cool. We've got major events coming off the back of it as well. It's not just about bringing the games here. We've got the infrastructure to host future games, and tourism and associated with that is a major part of our economy. Culture and tourism. So as well as the sport, there'll be a huge cultural festival attached to that, showcasing the best of Birmingham. Culture and creative industries is one of our key economic sectors. So this is providing a real boost for that and really showing off what we've got as a city and leaving a tourism legacy, which always follows an event like this. And community cohesion as well. I've mentioned some of the trickier aspects of the legacy of Empire and Commonwealth. But we are incredible for a city where people have come here from all over the world to make their homes. That's what Birmingham is. People have come from every corner of Britain, of the earth, to make their homes here in Birmingham, and that's what makes us incredible. And we want to really celebrate that. We've released funds for people to bid for putting on community events during the games to bring people together. And we're looking at leaving a legacy there of heritage trails and increased cross-community work. And then there's a little bit there about the business and tourism programme, which is running alongside the Commonwealth Games and is looking to generate a large amount of investment into Birmingham businesses. Touch briefly on Perry Bar. So if you've been up to Perry Bar, it's the area where the Alexander Stadium is, where most of the work action will be taking place with the games. The whole place has been redeveloped. Of course, it is the old BCU site that we're talking about here, where BCU used to be hosted up in Perry Bar. That has been taken to the ground and rebuilt as several thousand homes and a new neighbourhood of people, one of the best connected in the city with excellent transport links in the form of sprint buses and a brand new station. And we're working with people in the area to do a wider legacy for it. And then our future, our city plan, to show you some pretty pictures before I wrap up. Everyone likes pretty pictures. So our future plan is it's the next phase of development of the city centre, what we want that to look like, and making the most of our very, very large city centre. Actually, it's huge compared to a lot of other cities. It's a great opportunity. Got High Speed 2 coming to the city, wherever that may end up going. Less far than we thought it was this time last week, it turns out. High Speed 2 is not about getting to London quicker from Birmingham. It's about freeing up capacity on local lines. It's about freeing up space on local lines, more stopping services, more local commuter connections. It's about shifting cars and freight off the road and onto the rails and helping our transition to low carbon. It is about Birmingham being at the beating heart of that national network, and the Birmingham Curzon Street station is under construction at the moment to bring High Speed 2 to our city. Smithfield. I love the fact they've put fireworks on this slide. It makes it look like there'll be permanent fireworks at Smithfield. Smithfield is you can't miss it if you go past it on top of double-decker buses, the best place to see it. Huge site, it's one of the biggest city centre development sites in the whole world. It's where the old wholesale markets used to be. Going to be, it's where Pride has been the last couple of years. It's going to be part of, again, another huge site during the Commonwealth Games for us. But longer term, we are working with our partners at Lend-Lease to turn it into homes, working space, and a festival square as well for future events.
Bridget, sorry, 2 minutes.
Absolutely, nearly there.
Thanks.
Digbeth, again, looking to capitalise on the industrial heritage there and really grow Digbeth in a green way into what that could be. And there's sort of vision there as to how that might work. Headymore is a employment site to the north of the city, which we are developing again to bring in jobs up there. East Birmingham, one of the most deprived bits of the city. It's an area the size of Nottingham. And it's one of the most deprived bits of the country, actually. And it's an area we've carved out of Birmingham with a specific plan to help them grow, help get people into work, bring employment to them, and so on. So that is my canter through, and that's all covered in the Birmingham Development Plan update. That's my canter through what we're doing as a city. All of that is underpinned by green growth, of course. Our Route to Zero task force is vital, getting to zero, but also the employment opportunities that come off of that. I will wrap up now, but hopefully that's given you a very quick canter through of where we were before COVID, how COVID's affected the city, but also the incredible things our city is doing to fight back and to grow post-COVID. Now, I'll hand back to you, Alex. Hopefully it wasn't too far over time.
No, that's pretty good, Bridget. Thank you for that. It was an excellent presentation. I thought a really good synopsis there, the issues facing the city going forward. And of course, you point to the continuing massive problems around inequalities, and I think, some of my own work in the past has touched on the so-called hidden unemployed, the people who are deemed economically inactive. But when you peer below the surface and you see people who have no formal qualifications or for other reasons can't participate in the labour market, that the city does continue to lag behind in that sense. And it's quite a bifurcation, because on the one hand we have the growth of the financial services sector, we have advanced manufacturing. On the other hand, we have almost like a polarized workforce and people who are, to use that worn out phrase, left behind. So thank you for that. I would invite you all, Bridget, yourself as a panelist there, and everybody else, if you look at the chat function, you'll see, Bridget, there's already a couple of questions there for you from our audience. So if you feel free to reply directly at this point if you like, and then we will come back at the end and see what remaining questions we have. So thank you for that. I'm going to move along now. We're going to move along to our second speaker, and that's David Horsfall, who is Property Director at Webster and Horsfall Group and Director of the Tizen Energy Park. Now, just a bit of information here about David. He's a Chartered Surveyor with the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors and a member of the Royal Town Planning Institute. Having worked within the development industry for 10 years, David joined Webster and Horsfall in 2008 to lead the delivery of the Tizen Energy Park. Since 2008, he's been working with industry, academics and local government, harnessing the vision, passion and innovation of stakeholders from across the region to create a first kind of energy park that will deliver low and zero carbon power, transport, heat, waste and recycling solutions to underpin the transition to a preferably zero carbon future. Born out of Webster and Hall's 300-year-old manufacturing business, the Tizen Energy Park continues the theme of industrial innovation and seeks to create new systems and collaborative working opportunities to ensure that Birmingham is the epicentre of the new green industrial revolution. And that's certainly a challenge well worth taking up. So on that note, David, I'll hand over to you. Again, about 10 to 15 minutes speaking time, please.
Excellent, thanks, Alex. And an absolute honour to follow Cllr Brigid Jones. A really interesting presentation. Today, I'm going to focus on the making the city greener and healthier aspect. And I think the introduction hopefully gives you a feel for Tizen Energy Park. But over the next 10-15 minutes, I'll just talk a bit about who we are, what we do, and how we're going to contribute to this agenda. So, Tizen Energy Park was born out of the manufacturing business. So Webster and Horsfall have been making wire and wire rope in Birmingham for the last 300 years. We believe that collaborative working is the key to unlocking the green future of Birmingham. And we work with academia, industry and the public sector to deliver the projects on Tizen Energy Park, which I'm going to talk about. And we're looking to develop solutions that we believe will make Birmingham the centre of the next green industrial revolution. So, trouble moving on to the next slide. Bear with me.
It's okay if you have any continuing problems, we can mount it for you.
There we go. No, that's fine.
Grand.
So, sorry about that. This slide is to illustrate what we do at Tizen Energy Park. So at the top of the page, you'll see we talk about low and zero carbon energy, low and zero carbon transport, and waste and recycling. So these are our core areas of focus. And at the bottom of the page there, you'll see that they're the areas of specialism which are being driven through the site. So we've, with our strategic partner, the University of Birmingham, we've just built an amazing space called the Birmingham Energy Innovation Centre. Within that building, there you'll see each of those 6 pillars there focus on an area within those 3 core pillars we talked about earlier. So the site also has industrial space that's been refurbished, so we support business incubation. So that's the second bar up, talks about the energy incubation hub. So this is a mixture of office, lab and industrial space where we invite organisations with clever ideas in the green tech space, and we provide them access to the Birmingham Energy Innovation Centre as well as the commercial activity on site, and we encourage people to collaborate. So in terms of governance, you've got a management board of Webster and Horsfall, which is made up of 6 of us. You then have the University of Birmingham, who in 2018 became a key strategic partner and who are instrumental in building the Birmingham Energy Innovation Centre. And then we have the co-creation group. So this is where we invite anybody, and we continue to invite anybody that wants to become involved in this agenda to engage with us. And we meet quarterly, and we also have a number of subgroups. So the organisations shown on the right-hand side of the page are the organisations that have signed the Memorandum of Understanding, and they regularly participate in these meetings. And at the co-creation group, we discuss the big challenges that we have, and we solve these problems together, which is really exciting, and it's a privilege to be involved in. So this slide just to illustrate the activity that's underway at the moment on the site. So just working around the page. So phase 1, we have biomass power station, so 10 megawatt biomass power station. So think of that as the equivalent of, say, 25,000 homes being powered by renewable electricity. It also has a private wire into the site. So any organisation coming to Tizen Energy Park benefits from secure, green, renewable electricity. On the back of building that, we've managed to attract the ITM, who've built a 3.5 megawatt proton exchange membrane electrolyzer. So that's as the greenest hydrogen you can produce. It's the biggest hydrogen station in the country. And again, this is a really exciting illustration of this collaborative working. So this involved the City Council as a key stakeholder procuring buses, which will be on the Birmingham streets in the coming month. ITM, who have developed this technology, and they've built this world-class hydrogen refueling station, as well as other partners like National Express that will be operating, and ourselves, who and the local and Greater Birmingham and Solihull Local Enterprise Partnership, who've funded key infrastructure to enable this as well. We got the consents, we made it a de-risk place for them to invest. And on the back of that, we've managed to attract another organisation, Certes Energy, who are providing biofuels, and we've got 2 more projects about to come forward to deliver biomethane, bio-CNG to commercial vehicles, as well as commercial scale electric charging. So this is 6 years worth of working with 5 or 6 different organisations to create a refueling station, unlike any that's been developed before, all co-created with multiple input. So the bottom right hand side of the page, there's a 2.5 acre plot, which is next to the energy from waste plant for the city. So this is one that's on the drawing board at the moment. And again, there's really exciting opportunities. I think the energy from waste plant that sits beside our site presents interesting scope to look at how we recycle better, how we generate power, how we use renewable heat, for example. But also it could be a space that we scale up the hydrogen production above and beyond that, the 3.5 megawatt electrolyzer we have on phase 2. To the top left of the screen, you've got the Birmingham Energy Innovation Centre. So this was about £11 million worth of investment from the Greater Birmingham Solihull Local Enterprise Partnership. That's been matched by Birmingham University, the University of Birmingham. And so this is an incredible space that I would invite anyone that's interested to come and visit. And I'm hoping that organisations will see that this presents opportunities to enable their businesses to scale up and build this cluster that we're developing on site. Phase 4B, so this is a bid that we have put in at the moment to central government for the National Centre for Decarbonised Heat. So this is, again, really exciting. Councillor Brigid Jones was talking about the East Birmingham being one of the most deprived areas. So we're in East Birmingham, we're in a very deprived area with some huge challenges. And this is the sort of thing, if you can imagine the heating engineers of the future, they will be a really exciting, high-skilled jobs that involve heat pumps, air source, ground source, hydrogen boilers. We'll need to understand energy systems within homes, and this is what I hope a facility like this could create. New jobs that could be worked through schools, and also reskilling businesses within the area. We've got Worcester Bosch as a company within the West Midlands already who are investing heavily in this space. So this is the sort of thing that I think could be transformational if we got it right and we secured a building like this. And then phase 5, just to talk a little bit about our manufacturing operation. So we're a traditional manufacturing operation. We have a skilled workforce, and this is the really exciting thing for me as well, that we make a lot of components for the automotive sector. We're going to need to pivot and look at how we find a future beyond traditional manufacturing in the automotive sector. So we're looking at how that skilled workforce could be retrained, and they're very willing and they're flexible. And so that, part of our journey over the next 10, 15 years are how we now direct our operation to the growing green tech sector. And this slide is just to illustrate that we're looking at how we can ripple this activity through the wider area of Birmingham. So on the left-hand side, we've got the Tizen Environmental Enterprise District. So in their wisdom, the Birmingham City Council in about 2005 started out allocating this area as, or designating this area as an area that low carbon green tech companies should be focusing. And there's already some really interesting assets like the energy waste plant from the city that I talked about earlier, as well as a number of other waste and recycling depots. There's a consented another 25 megawatt energy from waste plant beside the railway line. So you're already seeing the start of a lot of interesting activity. We moved there because of the great transport routes as well. So the red line there illustrates the A45, so a massive asset and key route into Birmingham. The blue line there shows the Grand Union Canal, which I would argue is one of the most underutilized assets, which is amazing and we should use it more. And then the railway line and Brighton Tizen railway station. And you've also got this swathe of green space in front of us, which is the valley of the River Cole. So some really exciting projects underway. So recently 1.5 million ERDF funding has been secured. And we're working with the City Council, Canal and Rivers Trust, Environment Agency, and lots of other partners to look at how that green space can be regenerated and encourage the kind of healthier lifestyles and use of this green space, which is largely underutilized. Also, we're working with Jacobs, so the City Council have commissioned Jacobs to undertake a clean energy master plan. So this is happening at the moment. So that's looking at how the 240 businesses within this area can transition to a cleaner future. So some of the big challenges that I'll wrap up with in a minute are looking at how we might develop a heat network within the area, how we develop a private wire, and how we could help each of these businesses meet their own sustainability goals and look at how they circular economy within their businesses. And then on the right hand side, this is to illustrate the opportunity to linking up with city centre district heating systems. We've got another number of big assets that would underpin an expansion and really drive this low carbon heat across East Birmingham. So just about there. So finally, this slide's just to illustrate what our activity will be in 2022. So we wanted to put it out there, and this is really building on what we learned from the co-creation, that the areas that we're going to focus on, and likewise we invite others to come and participate. This is all about collaboration, so we want to bring in as many people as possible. So you'll see we're talking about decarbonisation of heat, flexible local grids, growing the hydrogen economy, the transition of commercial fleets to cleaner fuels, business incubation, as well as the regeneration of these blue and green spaces, and promoting community well-being. So probably close to my 15 minutes now. I'd prefer to have questions and whenever people would like to, because I can build on any of these, but hopefully this gives you a flavour of what we are and what we do. And thank you for having the opportunity to speak today.
David, thank you very much for that very interesting presentation. What you've just said there, particularly in reference to automotive, chimes very nicely with my own research. You know, it's certainly of direct interest to me. In terms of our audience, you know, to reiterate to viewers, we do invite you directly to post comments in the chat box, and then David, you can pick up on those directly there, as Brigid has been doing previously, and then we'll come back at the end if we've missed any to try and pick up on. So great stuff there. So I'm just going to move on quickly then to our next speaker so we can maximise that time. Emily, just before we let you in, Emily, I'll just recap with a bio. To repeat, Emily Stubbs is Policy and Projects Manager at the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce, where she leads on chamber policy development covering education, employment skills and business productivity. So no trivial sectors there. She also manages the publication of the annual Birmingham Economic Review, which is an in-depth exploration of the economy of England's second city and a high-quality resource for informing research, policy and investment decisions, produced in partnership with the University of Birmingham City Region Economic and Development Institute, which most of us will know as City Ready, no doubt. She has also coordinated the annual Growth Through People campaign, which was shortlisted for the Best Leadership Programme in the Business Desk West Midlands Leadership Awards. Emily incidentally studied law at the University of Birmingham and also took a mini MBA at Aston University. So on that note, Emily, I'm going to hand over the podium to you again for the next 10 to 15 minutes. And so thank you very much. I look forward to this.
Apologies, I knew I was going to do that. Fantastic, thank you ever so much.
No worries.
Brilliant. So before I began, I thought I'd give an overview of the Chamber of Commerce, Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce, for those who perhaps haven't come across us before. Accredited by the British Chambers of Commerce, we were founded in 1813, and we exist to connect, support and grow local businesses. So we have, as you can see on the slide, 10 divisions under the Greater Birmingham umbrella, 6 of which are geographical and 4 are thematic, which you can see at the bottom there. Within the Greater Birmingham Chambers, I sit in the policy team, which exists to research, inform and engage. So research business views, business sentiment on key issues, engage businesses in best practice campaigns and activities, and inform businesses on sort of government developments, policy developments that might affect them. So at risk of sort of touching on what Brigid went through, I thought I'd just set the scene of Birmingham, which sort of predates the pandemic and still very much the case now. Birmingham is an incredibly diverse and multicultural city. We're young, we have 46% of residents under the age of 29 and almost 50% of residents identify as ethnic minorities. The city is incredibly geographically connected. 90% of UK businesses and consumers are within 4 hours of travel time. And of course, the city is home to a 5G test bed. The city is also incredibly smart. West Midlands businesses spend about £2.5 billion a year on R&D. Certainly that was the case in 2019. And 8 universities across the West Midlands produce over 50,000 graduates each year. Birmingham is also incredibly entrepreneurial, as I'm sure you can see just walking around the city. In 2020, the city had over 8,000 new enterprises founded, which is the highest of any city outside of London. So if we sort of travel back in time to pre-pandemic, businesses were incredibly optimistic. So our quarterly business report, which is on the left there on the slide, is a quarterly report in partnership with Birmingham City University, which surveys businesses on business sentiment on a range of key indicators, everything from profitability to cash flow, demand, recruitment intentions, and everything in between. The report, we normally get about between 250 and 400 responses to surveying across Greater Birmingham, and it also feeds into data at national level, so feeds into British Chambers of Commerce data, which is used to directly inform and influence policy making in government and treasury. So looking at that picture pre-pandemic, in Q4 2019, businesses were incredibly optimistic. 40% of businesses were seeing increased domestic demand between Q3 and Q4, and 59% of businesses were expecting their profitability to increase over the following 12 months. Now, of course, with hindsight, we know what was to come. Pandemic hit, and in Q2 2020, 71% of businesses saw domestic demand decrease, 52% saw turnover expectations decrease, and 63% saw a decline in cash flow between Q1 and Q2. Just to sort of show you over the period of time, you can see that first dip in the GBR index combined, which combines manufacturing and services sectors. That first dip relates to the 2008 recession. You can then see, particularly in the UK GDP quarter-on-quarter growth, the kind of concerns of a potential double dip recession, and then sort of going along, going along until that complete crash in Q1, Q2, of the end of Q1, Q2 of 2020 when the pandemic hit. The West Midlands economy was particularly hard hit by COVID. West Midlands GVA dropped 13% in 2020 versus 9.1% across the country, and 46,000 redundancies were made between September and November 2020 in the West Midlands. As Brigid touched upon, youth unemployment rose to 13.8% in 2020 in Birmingham, and businesses, particularly customer-facing businesses, were hard hit by a massive decline in footfall in Birmingham city centre, particularly, as you can imagine, during the lockdown periods. Footfall in Birmingham city centre dropped 46% over kind of average in the 12 months to June 2021. Birmingham businesses were incredibly resilient and adaptive. 64% of West Midlands businesses reported using remote working to enable continuity, according to analysis by the British Chamber of Commerce. Meanwhile, as Professor Alex De Ruyter mentioned, you still had the ongoing impacts of Brexit. Again, apologies. The Chamber, in partnership with the West Midlands Combined Authority, have done a number of, a lot of research post-Brexit and liaising with national authorities post-Brexit on the sort of trading environment. But pre-Brexit, we were also working to help businesses prepare for that impact. Between May and June 2021, so even recently, 45% of businesses were reporting difficulty importing from the EU, 34% reporting difficulty exporting to the EU, and 40% reporting increased costs due to that Brexit impact. So throughout all of this sort of uncertainty and increased challenges for businesses, we've been working to support them. We've published a number of research reports. We've led a campaign called Keep Business Moving and Back Our Businesses, encouraging business continuity through the sort of darkest times of the pandemic. And we've also been doing, so you see that Mind the DAP report on the left-hand side, working with stakeholders locally, so Birmingham City Council as a fantastic example, but also nationally on the DAPs and business support, making sure that, you know, as far as possible, every business in the city had the support available to them to go through the pandemic and come out of the other side, whenever that might be. So we had 197 top stories in our Chamberlink Daily newsletter, which goes out to about 15,000 businesses in the city region every weekday. On the latest COVID-19 business news, our team made over 18,000 calls to local businesses and offered almost 3,000 hours of phone support to local businesses. We had almost 23,000 views of coronavirus pages on the GBCC website, where we've got a fantastic support grid, just detailing there were times of the pandemic where the support available to businesses was incredible. There was just so much of it. Businesses were really trying to navigate it, but finding it quite difficult. So we have a support grid that lays it all out. We also have best practice advice and guidance and peer-to-peer sort of learning available on our website via all sorts of digital forms. We held 186 webinars, all the way from roundtables and conferences to large-scale awards for over 6,000 delegates, and 439 companies contacted the Keep Business Moving at birminghamchamber.com inbox for support. which is still available, but obviously, particularly as business support on that landscape is a bit less confusing now, getting sort of less queries through. But those queries were sort of very specific queries that businesses were struggling with, and we'd be able to direct them to the right support within, well, the city region, but also nationally if necessary, to make sure that gaps in business support again were being filled. We also have an international team, an international trade team within the Greater Birmingham Chamber of Commerce. So that international team, with the West Midlands Combined Authority again, and ourselves and the policy team, produced the Brexit checklist in advance of Brexit and preparing for the impacts of Brexit. We also ran 50 training courses for 445 delegates between September 2020 and 2021. The team handled over 1,000 customer support hotline queries, and we had 34 workshops and webinars for 608 delegates on preparing for Brexit and then sort of adapting to the changes as they were being made. So what does economic recovery look like? Well, in Q3 of this year, 52% of businesses were seeing an increase in domestic demand, and 67% had increased their profitability expectations over the following 12 months. Just to sort of show over time, you can see that the QBR index for turnover is now above what it was pre-pandemic in Q4 2019 and kind of most of Q1 2020. And the index of profitability is also above where it was pre-pandemic. However, and again, as Brigid touched upon, Birmingham still has a number of challenges. 57% of Greater Birmingham firms who attempted to recruit in Q3 2021, 62% of those experienced difficulties doing so. And actually, we've just finished surveying for Q4 of this year, and that 62% experienced difficulties has actually increased to about 76% experienced difficulties in Q4. And that aligns with the national picture of record vacancies across the country, businesses not being able to fill the roles that they have with the skills available in the marketplace. 41% of businesses expect their prices to go up over the next 3 months. Inflation was one of the biggest pressures noted there, alongside finance costs. As you can see, £80 billion in government-backed loans were issued during the pandemic. Businesses obviously now are beginning to pay those back. Trade has also, of course, been impacted by those Brexit sort of barriers that remain. So July exports to the EU were £1.7 billion lower than in 2018, while the exports to the rest of the world had increased by £700 million. But there are unique opportunities on the horizon for Greater Birmingham and the wider region. So the Commonwealth Games course will see 72 nations and territories send around 6,500 athletes and team officials to Birmingham to compete in 19 sports and 8 para sports. It'll be the biggest event ever to be held in the West Midlands and the largest multi-sport event to be held in the UK since the London 2012 Olympic Games. Obviously, with an event of this scale, huge opportunities for local businesses. And so we surveyed businesses in Q1 of this year on their views on the Games. 93% feel that Commonwealth Games will positively impact the city. 45% are interested in directly bidding for contracts. 56% were interested in being a part of the wider supply chain associated with the Games. And 43% were interested in developing trade links with Commonwealth countries off the back of the Commonwealth Games. HS2, as you can see in the sort of middle bubble there, Europe's largest infrastructure project. Obviously, the news last week is quite a bitter disappointment. However, from a local perspective, Greater Birmingham is still in a very strong position to benefit from investment in rail, and we very much look forward to finding out what's the government's commitment to the Midlands Rail Hub, a project which has sort of extensive backing from the local business community, sort of means in practice. Finally, I wanted to touch on the green economy. So, as David sort of detailed, he offers huge opportunities for businesses in Greater Birmingham. Nationally, the British Chambers did a piece of research that found that 9 out of 10 businesses have no assessment on a series of key strategies for managing the sustainable transition to net zero. And in the West Midlands, our surveying in partnership with Coventry and Warwickshire Chambers of Commerce and Black Country Chambers of Commerce found that a lack of time, uncertainty of the options available, and a lack of grants were the biggest barriers businesses were facing in regards to this. So thinking about that, uncertainty about sort of where to start, what options are available, we launched in October, 30th September to 3rd November 2021, so it's just finished, our Sustainable Business Series. The Sustainable Business Series was all about sharing best practice and helping businesses understand the commercial benefits of reducing carbon emissions while creating, of course, a better world for future generations, and how they might go about that. So very much about peer learning, sharing advice from across our networks, and it was delivered in partnership with the Coventry and Warwickshire Chambers of Commerce. The campaign received over 300 delegates at 5 events and a Sustainable Business Summit on the 3rd of November, and 96% of respondents to surveying said that they were likely to recommend those events and webinars to contacts and colleagues. 67% of those attending, or virtually attending, learned something new that they will be applying in their organisation. So it's incredibly important to us as a chamber to be sort of sharing that best practice knowledge and guidance to the local business community as we sort of, well, as we've transitioned towards a more sustainable economy. And there are huge opportunities associated with that transition. So you can see in that middle bubble there, I've actually highlighted the Tizen energy part, which David has already talked about. But the low carbon and renewable energy economy, or Cllr as it's sometimes referred to, includes all sorts of goods and services that are geared towards helping the UK produce less greenhouse gas emissions, particularly CO2. And there are currently an estimated 66,500 UK businesses involved in the Cllr, supplying £42.6 billion of domestic goods and services and over £7 billion of exports. There are huge opportunities and industry-leading initiatives taking place across Greater Birmingham and the wider region, in particularly low-emission vehicles, fuel cell development, and alternative fuels. The shift towards electric vehicles is, of course, being accelerated through legislative measures and also changing consumer preferences. The UK government has announced that at the end of the sale of new petrol and diesel cars by 2030, and it's been estimated that £1.6 million of electric vehicles to be produced in the UK by 2040. It's a major opportunity for the West Midlands, which of course already is home to several major automotive manufacturers, one of which, or several of which actually, have already announced their intentions to launch new electric models and shift to an all-electric vehicles ahead of the legislated date. Clean energy, I'll touch upon it very briefly, as David gave a very detailed and incredibly informative sort of presentation on the Tizen energy part. But it's a massively growing sector within Greater Birmingham, based in that energy park region, and huge opportunities exist within the sector for grid upgrades, smart energy management, and alternative fuels. Then I also just finally wanted to touch upon the opportunities associated with the decarbonisation of heating.
Yeah, 2 minutes, Emily, 2 minutes, thanks.
Fantastic, thank you. It's one of the biggest challenges in the race to net zero. Buildings are responsible for around 19% of UK greenhouse gas emissions, and about 2/3 of that could be attributed to domestic heating. Moving away from gas heating and improving the energy efficiency of homes is essential in the transition to net zero. And the government has all sorts of ambitions for the installation of heat pumps, but that requires massive expansion of manufacturing, installation, and even the sort of training, design, and innovation surrounding that. But I just wanted to note the opportunity associated with the delivery of retrofits associated with tackling fuel poverty in the region. So the West Midlands has the highest incidence of fuel poverty of all regions in England. And in 2019, 17.5% of households were classed as fuel poor, compared to a national average of 13.4%. The ongoing energy crisis in the UK, which I'm sure we're all aware of, is not only increasing the burden of energy costs on households, but improving energy efficiency will not only reduce wastage, potentially lead to reducing household bills, improving living conditions, and the well-being of Birmingham's residents. So it's just a sort of whistle-stop tour through the impact of the pandemic and the opportunities that we see on the horizon for local businesses. But as other speakers have said, very happy to take questions.
Emily, again, thank you very much for that informative presentation. And you've touched on a lot of issues there. And again, you know, to talk about Resilient Brum going forward just reiterates all the challenges raised by greening the economy, climate change, COVID, and of course, Brexit, you know, which I won't be able to stop mentioning, but into the nature of our centre, of course. But, you know, there are real unfolding issues there, as you've all alluded to, well, not alluded to, pointed out directly, that we need to get to grips with. And, you know, clearly you know, at the risk of saying that the UK government really needs to get its act together in that regard. I'll say it if you guys can't. But, you know, so, you know, it's good to look at the positives and see that there are opportunities for us all going forward. And so, you know, one can, I suppose one can look at the glass as half empty or half full, but if we look at it as half full, you know, there is a challenge there. And I think, you know, with the skills base in the region, we can grab that. So on that note, then we'll move over to our final speaker, last but not least, our own Beverly Nielsen. Beverly, you know, what can I say? You know, Associate Professor and Executive Director here at the Institute for Design, Economic Acceleration and Sustainability, otherwise known as IDEAS. You're also a Senior Fellow here with us at the Centre for Brexit Studies. As many of you may know, of course, Beverly worked for the CBI for over a decade, lobbying as Director of the CBI in the West Midlands for improved infrastructure and connectivity as a vital element in driving our productivity forward as a nation. No doubt you'll all be aware, of course, that Beverly stood as the Metro Mayor candidate for the West Midlands twice for the Liberal Democrats, and during this time became aware of ultra-light, low-cost and low-carbon rail transport options made in the West Midlands, which you will tell us, you know, should provide greater opportunities for residents and business in terms of punctual and reliable, yeah, chance to be a fine thing, wouldn't it? Punctual and reliable, low emissions public transport, certainly low emissions. Now, Beverly has a number of hats, of course, councillor, chair also of the Ultralight Rail Transport in 2019, which is a company that brings together world-leading expertise in net zero lightweight rail-based transport. And she's going to talk to us today in that capacity, so we'll declare that up front. Beverly has also recently co-edited 2 books with Dr. Stephen McCabe, again our own Steve McCabe, not Steve McCabe, the MP, on exploring the green economy and green manufacturing, published by Bite-Sized Books, which I invite you to look up and or otherwise contact Beverly if you're interested further. So on that note, Beverly, thank you very much, and I'll hand over to you.
Thanks so much for that very generous and fulsome introduction, Alex. And
you're welcome.
It's great to be here today. Thank you very much for this opportunity. You've highlighted, I was really interested in talking specifically today about ultra lightweight, low cost and resilient net zero transport options, and specifically the one I've been looking at is through the lens of my role as chair of Ultralight Rail Partners. And I've highlighted here the board, very experienced board, range of expertise in design, long-term entrepreneurship and pioneer in terms of electric rail, and also tremendous depth of expertise in biomethane, because my interest is very specifically in the transitioning required to get to the hydrogen economy that is much talked about by our government, and of course we're all very excited about that opportunity. But you know, we've heard, especially with COP in the last couple of weeks, that the next 10 years, this coming decade, is absolutely critical. So this is really a solution for this time, the transition. And so first slide, I'm going to move on really quickly, actually, because I'm conscious of time. I put this up. A lot of people will be very aware of this, the emissions costs of the way we travel. But as you can see, the third lowest form of emissions is rail, and clearly metro is another low emissions option. But the traditional metro that we've been using is very heavy. It's a lot of it's imported as a solution. So I've been looking and particularly since my time as a mayoral candidate, at what else could be done. And I think we'll probably all be aware of the methane pledge that was made at COP26, and the UN for some time has been highlighting that cutting methane emissions is the quickest way to slow global warming. UK methane emissions actually amount to about 40 million tonnes a year, mostly from agriculture and landfill, but there are some fugitive emissions as well. But it's a fabulous if we can use biomethane rather than methane. Methane, which of course everybody will be aware of, is compressed natural gas and used in our gas network. But biomethane is entirely compatible and can be used as a renewable form of energy. So there's 5 wins here that I've set out for biomethane, and these were actually outlined by Nicholas Svenningsson from the UNFCCC when he spoke in Birmingham at the World Biogas Convention in 2019. But there are health benefits, as you can see at the bottom of this slide. So clearly, it is a win-win-win-win situation harnessing biomethane. And it's a truly circular economy fuel. This is one of the things that I think is often overlooked. We talk a lot about the circular economy, but this is a fuel that is made from organic waste. So whether it's food waste, human waste, animal waste, and clearly agriculture forming the bulk of our methane emissions, that's a very important source to be harnessed. The gas can be pumped into our gas grid. And again, I think we have to be very careful before when we're sort of looking to close down options that we've been using for 100 years plus, technologies that we know really well. In our quest to transition, we really must harness what is available to us today. So this then produces in its waste product from the production of biomethane digestates, which are non-chemical fertilizers. And I think we were hearing on the radio this morning how there is a huge amount of emissions from the production of our fertilizers at the present time, our chemical fertilizers. So we have also a great deal of organic waste available to us, but which we're not using. So ADBA, the Anaerobic Digestion and Bioresources Association, highlights 170 million tonnes of organic waste available. But at the moment, it's not being used, and we're only using 5 million terawatt hours of energy, of our biomethane energy at the moment, when we could be using something like 120 million or producing 120 million terawatt hours. I wanted to say just a few words about some of the work I've been doing in the context of Birmingham. When I first started looking at this area, I wasn't aware of the depth of expertise we have in Birmingham, West Midlands, in biomethane production. We formed I brought together a cluster, the Birmingham Biomethane Cluster, and it turns out we have really considerable expertise in the area. Severn Trent, Cllr Brigid, a French company headquartered in Birmingham, CNG, which is building these biomethane filling stations across the country at the moment, and Cadent Gas, of course, which is in particular looking at the use of biomethane as a transition option to hydrogen. And of course, with waste, food waste collection being potentially mandatory from 2023, we have a real opportunity to look at conversion of our transport, our public transport fleets, such as buses, to biomethane drivetrains, as has happened in Bristol, Nottingham, Reading and Peterborough, amongst other areas. Severn Trent I mentioned, and if Severn Trent were to convert all of the biogas it produces to biomethane, it would heat 50,000 homes, power 1,200 HGVs or 3,600 trams today. And as it uses a lot of its own biogas to power its own centres, then this isn't happening at the present, but the potential is really very considerable for us, and we have this expertise. And I think I mentioned about the potential for mandatory food waste collection. I think it's more like 13 million tonnes just of food waste that we could collect in future. Now, I noticed a question on the chat earlier about how actually sustainable is our hydrogen at the moment, how much of it is green. And actually, not very much is green at the moment, under 5%, but we are looking to green hydrogen production in future, and it's brilliant to see ITM Power at Tizen Energy Park and the amazing work that they're doing. But it's worth thinking at the moment that actually, you know, while we're transitioning to that green energy production, more CO2 emissions are being produced from the production of brown hydrogen than aviation, which of course is a very high profile emitter of CO2 emissions. But of course, biomethane is a green and wholly renewable gas. The one carbon dioxide emission that it produces through its atom, through the molecule, is actually already in the atmosphere, as opposed to a fossil fuel CO2 emission, which has to be unearthed from millennia underneath the earth. The clean air zone, we had a wonderful presentation from Cllr Jones, and thank you so much for that. You didn't focus too much on the clean air zone, and I've had a number of questions from business people on that, which I will plug into the chat. But one of the things that people are very concerned about is, are we going to have sufficient public transport alternatives given the restrictions on car movements in the city, and the impact of that potentially on retail and production in our city centre. So I wanted to look again at the big focus of our city councils has been on tailpipe emissions. Biomethane, of course, is a very good performer in contrast to fossil fuel emissions on the tailpipe front. We can see here in terms of carbon emissions, in terms of nitrous oxide, and obviously particulates. It's a particularly low emitter. But one of the other big sources of particulate emissions is tyre particulate emissions, and of course our EVs are heavier because the batteries have to be quite sizable, especially in bigger vehicles like buses, refuse trucks, and collection lorries, and so forth. Tyre emissions, particulate emissions, are actually 1,000 times worse than tailpipe emissions. And what we're finding with the areas, the cities that have actually had ultra low emission zones for a long period of time, is that they get to the sort of end of the tailpipe emissions focus and need to start looking elsewhere. And you know, we've seen the great focus on very sad premature deaths, and 40,000 or so a year due to poor air quality and particulate emissions, in particular in the UK. So this is an area of greater focus, we feel, for the future. Just very quickly on what have we been doing. There are other companies out there focusing on ultra low and very lightweight rail transport alternatives. Ours is biomethane battery hybrid focus, and this is a sort of vision of St. Chad's, but without any need for overhead wires. We're very focused on the need to be working with local authorities to get any further. We've come up with two options: a train-based option seen here, and the tram-based option on the earlier slide. And just a couple of words about what have we been. For me, as a mayoral candidate, I first became aware of the fact that there was ultra lightweight rail already in operation in the West Midlands when I visited Stourbridge, and became aware of the Stourbridge shuttle, which is using LPG as a fuel, the only one in the country, 70% cleaner than diesel, and is actually the most reliable form of transport in rail in the country, and in fact increases the reliability of West Midlands rail very considerably, as it's been over 99% reliable for the last 12 years, carrying over 6 million passengers during that time. But I was amazed that it hadn't been rolled out as an option, that it was one small branch line in Stourbridge. And I then became aware of a colleague of mine now, Jimmy Skinner, who in 98 to 2000 had pioneered the Bristol electric rail bus, which you can see in the middle of this slide, and which operated for 2 years, was fantastically popular in Bristol, made it into the local transport plan, but then I think it's fair to say, due to the focus on buses, got written out, and buses were favoured. I've been very privileged to be supported by the university, who've given me time to pursue this project, and we've won 2 Innovate UK projects over the last couple of years. The first one was a first of a kind project where we demonstrated the train tram that you can see here to the top left hand side, which is a biomethane powered flywheel drivetrain, first of its kind, very successful, built during the COVID period on time and to budget. Following that, we won a design project to design the BioUltra train, which you can see here, which was designed as an internal combustion engine powering a battery. So 2 very small engines, and I'll mention they're under 1 litre in size and carrying 120 passengers, got a vast amount of coverage, and designed by Paddy Fawcett of Invisio, based in Malvern Hills Science Park, fantastically talented designer. Here is a sort of visualization of the trams and the trains sort of set together as a fleet tile format. We're very focused in our design on the need for lightweight approach, and so it's a space frame, steel, sort of again low cost approach, sourced from the West Midlands. And here you can see the mirrored system giving 100% redundancy, so one engine breaks down, the other will work. The system shouldn't, it's pretty fail safe. It's a very high technology readiness level because we're using a very small internal combustion engine that keeps the batteries topped up, meaning you can go for 1,000 kilometers, no need for lots of overhead wires or battery chargers along the way, and then using electric powertrain for the bogies and the wheel system. Here's a sort of internal visualization. I thought what was interesting here was that I noticed some very interesting research by the Open Data Institute, which showed that Birmingham productivity was falling at peak times due to a high level of bus dependency. And I know that there's a lot of work going on now for sort of bus lanes, but what this research showed was that actually our high level of bus dependency as a country reduces our productivity levels, and they were estimating by about 7% compared to many cities across continental Europe, which had diversified and used an integrated approach with much more dependency on trams. Given the conversation about resilience today, and really fascinating to hear Emily's fantastic work in the chamber going on to support all of our businesses, and the tremendous work that's being done in distributing grants by the council, which Councillor Jones mentioned. We've looked at how can we create, again, very low cost but very effective resilient measures for COVID and other airborne potential viruses. And so
2 minutes please,
thanks
Beverly.
very much. I'm nearly finished actually, Alex, thanks so much. We've got a UV bath. Air comes in, is swept down past the passengers, falling a sort of air shield, goes out through the engine, which incinerates any particulates carrying viruses that have entered the train or tram. And a very quick last note, sort of cheap lightweight rail is one of the big challenges for rail systems in any city. And most are costing, sort of 20 million. One of the other systems I looked at, lightweight, a kilometre, 20 million a kilometre. We have been looking at a system used in Sheffield, developed by another great innovator, Professor Lewis Leslie, and this is coming in around 2 million a kilometre, and his system has been used in Sheffield for over a decade. So I think in conclusion, what I'd like to say is, we have got these amazing innovators out there in the UK. Often they're finding it very hard to access the funding to get to the next stage of trialling. We are very focused on hydrogen and electricity as solutions, and they're very important solutions, but there is another option out there in the form of biomethane or CH4, compressed natural gas, bio-CNG. That needs to be harnessed more in the transition to hydrogen. And we need also not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So well-tried and tested technologies such as the internal combustion engine can run on biomethane, can run on hydrogen, and can form a transition solution for us at a low cost. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Beverly. Again, that's very, very interesting to see some of these really innovative technologies coming forward there, and and it's great that we as an institution, through people such as yourself, have a direct involvement in managing and bringing these things to market, as it were. So, kudos there. So we have a few minutes left over for extra questions. I think the innovative format here has allowed us to answer questions as they've arisen. So we don't have anything live at the moment. So I'm going to use my prerogative as chair to sort of touch on a couple of themes that have emerged out of this conversation. And I think it's to yourself, Brigid, in the first instance, although others may wish to chime in. It seems to me that when you look at the combined impacts of things like COVID-19 on the way that people have had to adjust their work patterns, the format we're using today is testimony to that. I think most of us are probably sitting at home. You may be in the office, but that flexibility is there. Has necessarily had an impact on commuting and people travelling into the city centre. And therefore, to me, Brigid, it was very interesting that you talked about developing suburbs, or decentralisation, if that's a take on levelling up, if I interpreted you correctly, because that to me is what it would need to be to tackle these intra-urban inequalities. You then have the impact of sustainability and the need to challenge climate change and reducing the carbon footprint necessarily, apropos of the clean transports we're talking about here, reducing commuting, then that to me then comes back to the nature of development in the city. And I know today we focused on Birmingham City Council area, basically, although the conversation does apply to the rest of the combined authority areas Emily touched on as well. Is it a case then, Brigid, and I don't mean to critique directly the city's economic development strategy in that sense, is it a case then that we've had and not just Birmingham, an emphasis in the past on building up the city centre, and we've seen a lot of building and rejuvenation going on in the city centre. But what we've had now, to my mind, then is almost emblematic of then that it is desirable to have a shift to decentralisation and making some of these suburban areas capture more high value added jobs. Particularly when you think of East Birmingham and North Birmingham as being particularly deprived. I wonder if you had any reflections on that to share with us, and then defer to the other panelists as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, what we saw during COVID was as you say, a resurgence of those local centres that had been going into decline for a very, very long time. Birmingham is a city made up of villages and smaller places, your Mosleys, your Harborns, your Erdingtons, your Northfields, and so on. And yeah, the shift over the last probably half a century has been away from local centres and towards the city centre. And it's no accident that our public transport is generally great as long as you only want to get in or out of the city centre. And not fantastic if you want to go anywhere else or around the city. So we obviously we are growing the city centre because that is a fertile ground for that. We've and outlined some of the plans there. But local centres are key to it as well, for everything you've just mentioned. We saw during COVID people using their local shops, using their local high streets in a way that they just hadn't for a really long time. And a shift of use of the city centre, actually. So we saw people who live in the city centre starting to use it as their local centre, rather than sort of seeing it for the tourists or the business people. We saw a shift towards people using it as their local place, which is fantastic, and makes up for the lack of people coming in. There's some really interesting work done by the Cllr Business District, which is worth a look at the future of the business district in the city centre and how you sort of adapt that post-COVID and how you make that a space for the new world that we're in without people just commuting in every day the way that they might have done previously. And some really interesting work about how they're curating the space in between and so on. But what I'll just finish on is bring it full circle back to carbon and some things Beverly was talking about. So our car usage in the city at the moment is at or above pre-COVID levels, despite the fact that most people aren't back in the office. So despite the fact that most people are still working from home or in a hybrid way, our car usage is at or above pre-COVID levels. Not quite at the same peak we used to have at rush hour, but it's still pretty bad. Public transport usage is still down. We've got to shift that if we're going to go forward as a city.
Do you think that's a residual impact of COVID?
I think it's two things. I think it's people are terrified. A lot of people are terrified of getting on public transport because people aren't wearing masks, not behaving in a terribly safe way. I also think it's the boil the frog thing. So I think it's well known that if you build more roads, they will come. If you build space on the road, people will fill it. During COVID, the roads emptied and people suddenly realised that it was really easy to drive around because there was nobody in their way. It's got incrementally worse. We've been boiling the transport frog in Birmingham for the last sort of 6 months or so, incrementally worse. And of course, people don't notice it getting incrementally worse. They keep on driving and then suddenly it's awful and it's gridlocked without people really realising that their behaviour is contributing towards that.
Okay. Panelists, can I whip through everyone else? Anyone else wish to offer a view? Emily, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I can offer a comment on the point about sort of the renewed focus on local centres.
Yeah.
Sort of local high streets and things. Some of the businesses that we worked with, particularly the consumer-facing businesses, sort of in the lockdowns and the most sort of concerning points of the pandemic, moved. Well, they were in very expensive city centre premises, which is incredibly expensive to move. Some of them now have made the choice to move to local centres. So I'm trying to think of one that I know has announced it formally off the top of my head. But no, a number of the sort of bars and restaurants and things that we worked with have either expanded to local centres or moved their premises to local centres as a result of what happened during the pandemic.
Okay. Anyone else just before we wrap up? I think you're all on mute, panelists, so feel free to take yourselves off mute.
I've got a slightly tangential point which I've fed into chat for Brigid, but one of the business people I've been working with was obviously, like many others, concerned about the demise of our high street and, you know, the sort of even playing field against the online businesses. He's proposing a sort of increase in VAT of around 35% for the online businesses who, of course, you know, send their delivery vans all over the place. But the high street suffers and they have to pay the business rates. I wondered, Brigid, if I may ask you on his behalf, whether you have any views on that at all?
Above my pay grade to be allowed to set VAT rates, unfortunately. But that there is some level of intervention that is needed because we've had a complete shift from one type of retail to another without any real adjustment in regulation or taxation around that. And our car usage and, you know, small van usage and everything has soared from online deliveries. It's massive. The impact of that isn't being sort of taxed or recognised in the way that it needs to be. So definitely there's got to be some level of intervention there to level the playing field a bit. We're just going to keep seeing high streets declining the way that they are. I know there's been a question asked about the clean air zone as well in the chat. So just to cover that off. Our early indications are showing that air quality is improving in the city centre. We think we might just about be in legal limits for the first time in God knows how long, which is very exciting. But even the legal limit is way too high for what we would want for health reasons. So ultimately, somebody asked a question earlier about shifting to electric cars. Even if everyone shifts electric overnight, we will still have a gridlocked city. We will still have particulate matter coming off of tyres and everything. Ultimately, we've got to have that shift to public transport. And the awkward truth is the only way we speed up buses is by getting cars out of their way. And that's a very tricky conversation for us to have as a council because it's controversial. It's one we're having.
Yeah, but as you say, Brigid, I mean, shifting to EV doesn't solve congestion. You know, it's, you know, it's a step in the right direction, but, you know, we need as a society to revisit the way we look at mobility. So, look, on that note, I think we've answered all the questions that we've been having fielded to us. People in, you know, out there listening to us in the audience, if you have any further comment or question, or we didn't touch on something you wanted to ask today, feel free to get in touch with us, and we're happy to relay any further comments and questions to our panelists. I'm sure our panelists are quite happy for you to contact them directly through their publicly available channels. So, you know, that just leaves it to me to say, guys, thank you very much for the discussion today. It's been really stimulating and engaging. I know we use those words as throwaway terms, but it has. You know, it's nice to be able to bring in different areas and use practical examples. So on that note, I want to say thank you very much to each and every one of you. Sian, thank you for the technical support in getting all this together. I mean, it's pretty much gone off without a hitch, so that's always great, you know, and run in a timely fashion. So thank you very much.
Can I ask, Alex, will presentations all be online on the CBS Centre?
Yes. My understanding is this is being recorded, so we can make them available online. I'm sure everyone here is happy if you're not speak now. Otherwise, you know, we'll make these available for people to record and download and listen to later. So yes, Beverly, thank you for that. Going forward, it's not yet 100% clear to me how we're going to run these in the future. I quite like this setup because I think the cost involved for people to log on is trivial. That said, I know we miss out on the networking and direct face-to-face, but I think what we'll do going forward is move to some type of hybrid setup. Once the winter is out of the way and hopefully the fog clears and we all have our booster shots, and I think we can feel more confident in more direct and more often encounters. So we'll keep you posted there in terms of the themes that we're going to go forward on. So on that note, thank you very much, everyone, and have a good day.
Thanks so much. Thanks all our panelists. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Emily. Thanks,
Bye.
David. Bye
Bye.
now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye. Bye.